Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the podium Mrs. Scot Wingo.
Thanks, Glenn. How's everybody doing tonight? So hopefully the title of this talk caught your attention, and that's why you're here. What does this mean from Aiken to IPO? I've been reading too much BuzzFeed, I guess, to kind of, if it was BuzzFeed, it'd be 13 reasons. They always use a prime number for some reason. I've always wondered what the science is behind that. 13 adorable cats and Scot Wingo. That would have been my BuzzFeed title. So you're probably wondering, who is this guy? Mladen gave you a little summary. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm from a little town called Aiken, so that's where that comes from. This is a little tiny town in South Carolina near Augusta, Georgia. So if you golf, and I don't get a lot of golfers at my computer science talks, most golfers know where it is, or if you ride horses. Otherwise, you have no idea where this is. Has anyone ever been to Aiken or heard of Aiken? Oh, a couple, great. It's a really small town, horses and golf, and I do neither. So that's kind of, I felt a little bit out of touch there. It's a very strange town too because it's near the Savannah River site. And if we had nuclear engineers here, you would know what that is. And that's where they breed a lot of uranium. So my high school is essentially half kids of nuclear scientists, and then the other half are the local folks that have no idea. Our science fairs are really fun because one half of the room is volcanoes where you add, the vinegar. The other half is Geiger counters, fission reactors, and stuff like that. So it's kind of that summarizes my high school experience. Very strange. This is my house in Aiken. My dad was very unusual because he was an entrepreneur, and I had one of these in my house, and it is a VAX. So there used to be a company called Digital Electronic Corporation. Their CEO, Ken Olsen, famously said when Microsoft or IBM came out with a PC, he said, "This is preposterous. No one would ever want a computer in their home." When he said that, I actually had one of his computers in my home. So my dad was an entrepreneur, and he was a computer programmer, and he ran a little business out of our house. And he would work on this VAX. My friends would come over and say, "That's a really weird refrigerator you got there." This guy had... You could buy 16 meg of memory and it would cost $50,000. So just to kind of put that in perspective. I don't have my iPhone on me right now, but it would be like a $2 million and equivalent kind of a thing to that right now. I'll get back to why that's interesting. So what my dad did was he did a inventory management system for carpet sellers and carpet retailers. And ultimately he sold that business and did really well with it. So I had entrepreneurship every day at the dinner table about, how are your customers doing, and oh my God, the server crashed, that kind of stuff. My first computer was a TI 99-4A. I had an add-on modem, and it had a tape drive, which was awesome. You could hear the data going back and forth. Then I upgraded to an Apple II. I learned BASIC on that guy and a little Pascal on there. Then I got a 2C, an ultra portable. It was kind of funny. It was portable, but only the bottom part was portable. You had to heave the monitor around with you too. It's kind of ridiculous. And I went to high school at South Aiken High School. Aiken's one of these small towns that has essentially two schools. There's North Aiken, or Aiken because it was first, and then South Aiken, and of course that's our huge rivalry. We're the thoroughbreds. A life-changing event for me was my dad is a business guy, obviously, and he was always trying to get me involved in business. I was like, boring, don't want to care about it. And then he gave me this magazine. He said, "Hey, read this." So this was when I was a senior. A couple things you can probably tell about South Aiken High School is kind of the jocks were the kings, and I was head of the computer club, so I was not unaccustomed to atomic wedgies and noogies and all that kind of stuff. So this really caught my attention for a couple reasons, 4 reasons. Number one, I was like, hey, there's someone that's geekier than I am, and his name is Bill Gates, and there he is, folks, in all his grandeur. So that's interesting. And then number 2, it says the deal that made Bill Gates, he was 30, so he was still relatively young. I was 18 at the time, so 30 didn't seem terribly old. And he made $350 million from this deal. So that got my curiosity up. And what that deal was Microsoft went public, and they did this thing called an IPO. And I thought that was really fascinating. And I said, that's pretty cool. And it made it seem like he made $350 million. Well, the company was valued at $350 million. He owned a part of it. And so there's some nuances in there, but it's a good, pre-buzz era kind of way to get your attention. So I decided pretty early on that it would be fun to do an IPO, and it would be really fun to make $350 million. Not just for the money, but for one other reason, to get a Lamborghini. Okay, so you guys don't remember this. Marshall probably does. Where's Marshall? So there's this high audio company called Alpine, and they would get teenage boys into their stereo equipment by giving out these really nice, slick photos of Lamborghinis. So I thought that was pretty cool. It looks like a space car. So hey, I was 18. I said I would like to do an IPO someday. That would be fun, so I can get a Lamborghini. Went to University of South Carolina, and I thought I wanted to be a hardware designer, so I did computer engineering. And I realized pretty quickly that I'm not very good at hardware. I make smoke come out of the chips, which is not really good. But I realized I was actually pretty good at software. My uncle was at NCR, where they made these things called towers, and they were kind of like servers in today's vernacular. And I had several summer jobs there, and this is where I formed a lot of my opinions about businesses. The first summer I was there, I was working on this assembly line, and the whole idea was these computers would come off the assembly line, and I was in the QA department. We'd put a blanket on it, run it through some tests and whatnot. And they were behind on production, so they told me, you can make something like $8 an hour, but you can work as many hours as you want, and once you get to 40, we'll pay you time and a half. And I was like, all right, $12 an hour, that's pretty crazy after 8. So I would literally work, I think I worked 100 hours a week for like 6 weeks. And then finally they came to me and they're like, where's Wingo? Wingo. I was like, I'm over here. And they're like, stop working. You must stop working. You're killing us on our overtime budget. So that's where I learned the benefit of hard work and working overtime. Also, I learned that all the other people on the production line, they kept telling me to slow down. I was making them look bad. They're like, you're working too hard. You're going too fast. Slow down. We as a team decided we're going to do 5 QA tests an hour, and you're doing 10. Could you please just slow it down? So that's when I learned not all teams are aligned on how they build things. The second summer, I got promoted out of that department and into another department where I was supposed to do some testing, but I actually sat there all summer waiting on the operating system tapes. So in the massive bureaucracy that this company had, it took from kind of June to August to get the operating system tapes. So I just basically played the equivalent of Minesweeper for all summer. The third summer, what was interesting is I got moved to the QA department, and I had operating system tapes, and that was good. And they got there, and they said, your job is to crash stuff. And I was like, this will be fun. So the first thing, I was learning fractals, I think, recursion, and I wrote a little fractal thing, a recursive fractal thing, and I let it run on like 8 machines and then like pummeled a server. And after the second day, the server just crashed, like hard faulted. And I handed it to the QA guy. He's like, this would never happen in the real world. Do real tests. And I was like, what are real tests? He's like, some data entry or something. I was like, I'm never going to crash this banging on the keyboard. 10 days later, he came back and he said, can you generate that test again? I was like, why? I thought you said it would never happen in the real world. He's like, we had one of these units in the field, and it had the exact same thing happen, and it looks just like what you did. I was like, ha, gotcha. So that was interesting. Another thing I learned at NCR that was interesting is everyone's given a badge on day one. Have any of you ever done kind of internships for a big company? They do all this training and stuff. And on the back of the badge, it's got the values of the company. And like number 1 is don't steal. Number 2 is be honest. And number 3 is treat people with respect. And I was kind of like, this is, gosh, who are they hiring where they have to kind of teach you these lessons, kind of the kindergarten lessons? So in my early kind of experience with big companies, I realized I'm not really sure that's a huge fit for me. So after that, I came here to NC State, also did computer engineering, worked with Dr. Miller, and this is before there was an entrepreneurship program and a campus-wide thing. But Dr. Miller and another guy, Dr. Vandenbelt, were very entrepreneurial, and they were very helpful in that regard. And I really loved my time here at NC State and learned a ton. And when I graduated, I had 3 job offers. I had IBM, which was kind of the gold standard at the time, Motorola, where I could go work on this new chip they were working on and do simulations and move to Austin. This was going to be the hot new chip, and it was going to put Intel out of business. That didn't work very well. And then I had that dude that I worked with at NCR had started his own company in Connecticut called Bristol Technology. So I went to Dr. Miller and I was like, I've got a tough choice. I could go kind of with the standard thing, or I could take a bit of a risk. And he said, how big is your mortgage? I was like, I don't have a mortgage. What's a mortgage? And he's like, how about do you have a car payment? And I was driving like a 10-year-old beat up Honda that was paid off. I was like, no. He said, why don't you take a risk with the startup and The worst case is you'll learn a bunch, and then you can go back to IBM and Motorola, and surely they would hire you. So I went to work there, and this was a family-owned business in Connecticut. And what they did is they could take Windows programs and convert them over to Unix. They basically rewrote the Windows API in Unix/X Windows back in the day. So what I learned, family-run businesses can be tricky. I'm an only child, and there was like 2 brothers and a sister and another brother in this business, and they were having all these sibling fights and throwing staplers at each other and stuff, and I was like, whoa, this is really strange for me. I'm used to just kind of being off doing my own thing. Another thing I learned as a software guy was, got to the point where I was managing people and I liked that. Then they would parachute me into customers, and I realized I actually liked working with the customers. In those days, you were very pigeonholed, and it's very easy in the engineer computer science to get pigeonholed. But I realized, I really like working with customers, understanding their problems and figuring out how to solve them. I also realized that I don't have a big tolerance for company culture that's kind of transparency. Hey, why are we doing this, boss? Well, just shut up and do your job. Business decisions that make no sense. These guys famously decided they were going to sue Microsoft, and they won, but the judge gave them $1 as kind of just a little token thing. So they spent like $50 million suing Microsoft and ultimately won $1. I'm from Aiken, South Carolina, and I'm not good at snow and cold weather, so I've got a lot of bad stories about that. And this place was so expensive that I lived much better as a grad student here in Raleigh than I did as a young professional there. Starter homes, fixer-uppers were like $800,000 kind of thing. So after about 3 years, I kind of said, you know what, I think that I want to move back to Raleigh, and I want to kind of start my own business and kind of solve some of these kind of problems. So I started a business called Stingray Software, and as a developer, we kind of said, what can we do? Let's build tools for other developers. It's kind of a no-brainer for me. So what we did is we did developer tools for Visual C++. That's Microsoft's compiler. And what happened is they had this class library called the Microsoft Foundation classes, or MFC. And I wrote a book. Marshall also wrote a book around, no, you did Motif, right? Did you ever do an MFC book?
I did, Lance and I did an MFC.
You guys did, okay, yeah, okay. We had very similar careers, Marshall and I. He did when I was doing X Windows at Bristol, he was doing X Windows and another thing, Motif. So then I did this as well, and we started literally, this is totally bootstrapped, no venture capital or anything like that. And our business plan was, let's each put $5,000 into the company and buy an ad in the Programmer Journal that comes out in 3 months, and then build the product over those 3 months so that when the ad comes out, we have something to sell. That was the business plan on a napkin. And it worked, shockingly enough. So we grew that from 0 revenues. The ad came out, and the phone started ringing off the hook. A classic moment, and this ties in with Fidelity, is the phone rang one time. I'm literally in a 1-bedroom apartment trying to sound official, and I'm like, Stingray Software, this is Scott. This lady's like, yes, this is Deborah from Fidelity Purchasing. We'd like to order 50 copies of your program. And I was like, okay, hold on, please. And I was like, oh my God, 50 copies. And they were floppies, and it was on 10 floppies. So I'm like doing the math of, all right, and it takes like 5 minutes to make a floppy. I'm like, oh my God, it's going to take us like 6 weeks to make this thing. And then it's like, okay, yes, we can do that. And she's like, can I get a PO? And I was like, hold please. And I was like, what's a PO? So I had to make up, that'll be PO number 891, FB. So a lot of fun stories and adventures in that. And ultimately, for 3 years, ran that company and did really well. We ended up with 50 people and about $12 million run rate. But what we found is we had about 2,000 customers by that point, and there's probably 4,000 Visual C++ developers. So we felt like we kind of saturated the market. We kind of had half the market. And we went to this other company and called Rogue Wave Software and said, we knew that to expand, we would have to go internationally because we felt like we had saturated the US market. And we went to them and said, hey, we'd like to do a deal. They had a big international sales staff. And we said, we'd like to do a deal where you guys could sell our product internationally. They said, okay, that's interesting. How much do you think we can sell? We said, well, we're doing kind of 12 million here in the US, and we think over 3 years we could do 12 million internationally. We don't see a reason why not. And they said, well, why don't we buy the company? And we said, sure. So we sold the company to them in 1998. So what I learned is marketing isn't as hard as it seemed, at least to developers. So developers we understood how to market to them. They read like 3 magazines, they go to 2 trade shows, and they like beer and pizza. So how hard could it be? The other thing I learned is company culture really matters, so we hired sales reps and I had to manage these folks and figure out how to motivate them, and they always wanted to know what's the vision of the company. I was like, the vision of the company is to sell more stuff, what else could the vision be? So I learned all about that kind of thing, about how you have to really put forth a vision to get people motivated to come in every day and get excited about your business. So that was a good experience, but it was kind of a single and no IPO. So took the proceeds of that, and there was this dude, Mark Andreessen, who came out with a web browser around this time, and the internet bubble was off to the races. And so I figured, hey, I should start an internet company. So we started an internet company, and I'm a big Star Wars fan. How many other Star Wars fans do we have here? When I sold before I sold my first company, I collected little Star Wars stuff, and then after we sold Stingray, I could collect big, giant Star Wars stuff. So I have life-size collectibles and all that kind of stuff. And I started spending a lot of time on auction sites and doing this new thing called e-commerce, which was kind of born in 1997 when Amazon came online. And I had this great idea to do this search engine across e-commerce sites. And I was very excited about it, and we were working on it and thinking about, could we do it? And then 10 companies literally announced they had raised funding to do the same thing. And that was kind of depressing. But the part of e-commerce I liked as a Star Wars fan was auction sites. eBay was around, but it was very young. There was these prop auction sites. There was probably 200 auction sites, and there was no way to search them all. So we said, let's build a company to do that. It's a harder problem. Let's do it. So in July of 1999, started this company, AuctionRover.com. And the idea was we would bring up this consumer search engine and then have sellers of auction stuff. We'd have a platform for them to bid, and that's how we would make money. So kind of like cost per click advertising that you all know with Google, we wanted to do the same thing with auction sites. And all this was built off this company called GoTo.com, who I was kind of following pretty closely. They had invented paid search. Ultimately, Google made all the money, so there's an interesting lesson in there. So it was the exact opposite of Stingray software. At Stingray, we had no VC, and we had revenue day one, and we would grow and make some profit and be profitable and hire another person, and our expenses would go up and revenue would go up, very kind of linear. This was, we never made a single dime of revenue. We really didn't have a business plan, raised $3 million of venture capital and just see what would happen. Ultimately, what happened was the company that invented paid search went public, and then they acquired us in May of 2000. So this was pretty exciting because right around this time, you could kind of tell that these companies were going public with no revenue and X number of visitors and eyeballs, and it was not sustainable. And we were able to kind of be part of a company that survived through that. They changed their name to Overture and ultimately got bought by Yahoo. But that was a really good time. We're kind of like one of the last companies out of before the bubble burst. So I got really good at raising venture capital. The secret to raising venture capital is to not make revenue. It like ruins the whole thing. Revenue and profits, it's like a whole, it makes it harder to raise money because then they want more revenue and profits. So when you have neither, it's a lot easier just to kind of sell a vision. I say that facetiously, but everyone is still doing it. Like Uber and all these guys are doing really well. They're called unicorns now, and most of these unicorns have almost no revenue, ironically enough. Like Pinterest has $20 million in revenue or something, but they're a multi-billion-dollar kind of thing. So we're back to that. Timing can be everything. So selling when we did, a lot of people thought we were dumb, and we sold for like $100 million, and everyone's like, you should hold out for $300 million. I'm like, dude, we have no revenue. Are you crazy? I'm going to take this and run. That turned out to be the smart thing to do. When you do have this compelling vision of the future and everyone's aligned, then you can build teams that can do stuff that you never thought were possible. So we built this whole thing literally in 3 to 6 months, and it was scanning 5 million listings, real-time search, all this kind of stuff that today you would just spin up a cloud service and do, but we were doing it on a tight budget with servers and all that kind of mess. Transparency is huge. So, I didn't like it when I worked for someone that wasn't transparent. So whenever folks would come up to me and say, how are we doing? We would be very honest and say, look, we raised $3 million. We've burned through 2. We've got $1 million left. That gives us another 3 months. We'll probably have to raise more money when we get to the bottom of that. There could be a period of time where we run out of money. And what you find is people actually will kind of be like, okay, thanks for telling me. And that builds the loyalty of the team. So a big thing I learned is the secret to building a great place to work is build one where you would want to work. And I know that sounds simple, it's kind of a golden rule thing, but so many people don't do that, it's kind of shocking. Or they don't realize that the culture has kind of gone awry on This brings me to one of my favorite movies next to Star Wars is Office Space. This is definitely required watching for you if you kind of have a sarcastic sense of humor. Very funny movie, love it. This guy's the boss. He just wanders around with his coffee mug and asks people for their TPS reports, which is like just total bureaucracy. No one ever looks at these things. They hire these consultants to come in, and they're all kind of like, what do you do here? And no one can really answer the question. They beat the crap out of a fax. It's really good. So what happened is we sold our business, Auction Rover, to GoTo.com. I'll call them Overture. And then this little company by these two PhDs out of Stanford called Google came around, and the GoTo guys came to us and said, you know, we're going to go buy a bunch of search engines and compete with this Google company. They're kind of a flash in the pan. They probably won't be big at all. Two wacky Stanford dudes. And what we decided to do, they said, we're going to shut down what you guys have built. After we sold the business to them, we started working on the seller side of things. So we had done the consumer-facing part of Auction Rover, and then we started working on the seller interface. And realized a couple things. We signed up a bunch of sellers, like 3,000 or 4,000 of them. But the problem was they would call us day and night and want to talk about their cat. And they never wanted to pay us much at all. We got to the point where they paid us anywhere between $10 and $20 a month, which was almost nothing. And then they would call us constantly. So every time they'd call, we'd be upside down instantaneously. So we're kind of like, guys, is there a business here? And then the epiphany that became ChannelAdvisor is one day I was looking at these reports, and our number one seller of our software was always this lady, Granny Goose, and she sold some kind of pottery or something in Iowa. And I looked one day, and it was Sun Microsystems was our number one seller, and they sold like $2 million worth of servers on eBay. What had happened is because of the dot-com bubble burst, all these companies had massive inventory, and they were desperate to liquidate it. So they would put it on eBay at pennies on the dollar to sell. This is when eBay was literally like 98% Beanie Babies, and they were just that desperate. They're like, I'm going to put these servers next to the Beanie Babies. Hopefully some MIS guy is going to be looking at a Beanie Baby and find our server. They were that desperate. And I'm not an entrepreneurial genius, but I figured, all right, $2 million in servers and $20 a month. Maybe we could charge more. So, and then the next month, IBM started to do it, and then Motorola, and then Nokia. And I was kind of like, this is pretty interesting. These people are treating eBay like a sales channel, not a Beanie Baby collectible site. So concurrently with that, what happened is the Overture guys said, hey, we're going to shut you guys down. Sorry, peace out. It's been fun. And we said, wait, before you do that, what if we kind of buy back this one kind of wacky idea we have? And we were able to do that. In 2001, we spun out of Overture as ChannelAdvisor with this kind of idea of, could we build something for the IBMs and the Suns that were using our software? Then, just to keep the story short, we were able to self-fund through kind of the wreckage of the dot-com bubble burst. And then one day a VC called me and he said, hey, I collect Roberto Clemente baseball cards and I keep seeing ChannelAdvisor all over eBay and other collectible sites. Who are you guys? And ultimately he led us on a Series A. We raised about $75 to $80 million through a series of funds here. And what we do at ChannelAdvisor is the following. So we have cloud-based software as a service, whatever you want to call it. Retailers, we have about 3,000 retail customers, so that can be Saks, Belk's, Dick's Sporting Goods, whoever. They put their inventory into our software, and then we publish it across the internet to different e-commerce sites. We publish it to Google. Have you ever seen those Google listings that have little images and prices? Those are called product listing ads. We do that. We do 150 comparison shopping engines. And we support eBay as a marketplace, meaning the transaction happens off the retailer's website. We support like 57 different marketplaces. So now we support eBay, Amazon, Jet, Mercado Libre, Tmall, all these kind of companies that you hear about. On an average basis now, about $6 billion goes through our platform. And so imagine what we do is we give the marketer over there this dashboard for managing all these sales that are happening across the internet. So publishing their content, making sure the price is right, and then understanding what they paid for that sale so they can kind of answer questions like, if I had an incremental dollar, where should I spend it? Should I put it on eBay? Should I put it on Amazon? Should I put it on my own website and buy more Google traffic? What should I do with that? What are the mobile trends for my software? These kinds of things. So that's what we do at ChannelAdvisor. We have about 650 folks right now, and we had raised about $80 million in venture capital. The most exciting thing, though, is 27 years later, we went public. So after seeing my Bill Gates in May of 1986, in May of 2013, we went public on the New York Stock Exchange. And this was very exciting. You go to the New York Stock Exchange, and there's still humans that trade on that one. There's two stock exchanges, NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange. You go on this podium, and you get to ring the opening bell. And that's what I was doing there. And then after that, I'm a huge fan of, I'm a CNBC junkie, so I watched this show called Mad Money with Jim Cramer. I got to meet Jim Cramer. I've met him like 6 times since then. It's very surreal. I felt like I was on Iron Man. Have you seen Jim Cramer's always on Iron Man? I felt like I was like in this weird meta thing where I was kind of like filming myself on Iron Man or something. It was very strange. And then what you do is Goldman Sachs led our IPO, and then you go and you kind of watch this human thing interact where these are the guys that are selling and they're calling out, you can't see them, but over here is a whole other group of people, and there's this whole cool auction thing that goes on where they figure out where your stock starts to trade. Very awesome, and was able to check the life box of doing an IPO. Learned a ton at ChannelAdvisor. Some of the highlights, having done installed software, doing things cloud-based, software as a service is awesome. So we literally had, at Stingray Software, we had probably 8 versions of our software, and invariably someone would call, we're on version 8, this dude would call up, he's like, I'm on version 5 and I found a bug. So some poor developer had to go find version 5 out of a branch, install it on a machine, duplicate the bug, create 5.0.1, and then save that and then send it back out to the customer. And then you kind of iterate on that over time, and you end up with this creeping massive gloop that kind of slows down your business. At ChannelAdvisor in the cloud, we can flash update everyone every 30 days, boom, 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 so that we don't have to worry about all that kind of stuff. It enables us to go much, much faster. So to put it in vernacular of my teenager, cloud rules, installed software rules. Agile software development, love it. When we were at Stingray, Microsoft was our big partner, so we kind of followed how they did software development, which was on kind of 18-month cycles. In the first year of ChannelAdvisor, we tried that, and like literally every 3 months we were resetting those 18 months, and we've got almost nothing done. We said, this is crazy, we've got to change this. So we do Scrum, Kanban, whatever works, and we put out new code every 30 days, because literally in our world, everything changes very, very rapidly, so we have to be able to respond to that. The other thing I learned as CEO is when you're at 50 to 100, under 50 people, life's easy. When you get to 50 people, the first person comes to you and says things like, yeah, I don't like Sally, I'm not going to sit near her anymore. Or, Bob makes me angry. Or Joe said this in a meeting and I hate his guts. Or what's my favorites, what's our inclement weather policy? It's, as an entrepreneur, that's a tough one. You're kind of like, get into work, get your ass to work. But these are the kind of things that as you scale, you really have to kind of think about and say, well, get your ass to work is not going to be good in a handbook. Can we say, get your butt to work? No. All right, if you don't feel like your life's terribly threatened, get to work kind of things. When you get to kind of 50 and 100, you can still kind of bust through a lot of these things, but after 100, when you can't remember everyone's name on a daily basis, or the new guy takes you a while to learn his name, then it really matters, this whole thing of culture. So I spend a lot of time thinking about that, of how do you inject culture into a company and make sure that it's kind of around for the long haul. The number one thing I like is transparency. I always think about Office Space and all the silly stuff that goes on there. So eliminate bureaucracy and be transparent are the big things. We keep iterating on this to try to make sure we're still as nimble as we can. The other thing I found is once we got past kind of 30 million in revenue and 300 people, there was no books anymore. I read books constantly about business stuff, and I found that there was no more books to read about it, and that was kind of scary. There are some out now, but so it felt kind of lonely being out there in the Triangle area. There's not that many companies that have kind of gotten to that scale, so it was hard to find peers. One of our VCs was from the West Coast, and I would frequently go out there and meet with folks and get their advice. That was helpful. The other thing I've kind of done, and this is kind of a hallmark of my career, is being almost so like bullheaded and stupid that you don't realize what you can't do, just to do it. I know that sounds silly, but it's true. Like in the early days, people are like, hey, eBay, like in the early days of ChannelAdvisor, eBay shut us down because there were no APIs, so we would have to scrape their site to put listings on there. And I was like, well, I'm going to call Meg Whitman. And they're like, you can't call Meg Whitman. So I just picked up the phone and called Meg Whitman. And she's like, yes. And I said, you're shutting us down. She's like, who are you? And I explained it. She's like, you're right. That does sound bad. We want listings and sellers, and we shouldn't shut you down. And then she fixed it. If I had thought about it, I would have never done that. But there you go. So just kind of bulldozing your way through can help you a lot in life. One thing I'm really proud of, the IPO and all that stuff's great, but for 4 years in a row, we were best place to work, so worked really hard at that and on the culture side. So what about the Lamborghini? The sad part of the story is I did not buy a Lamborghini. Can I get an aw? Oh, thanks, yeah. But I did treat myself to a Tesla, which is even cooler. So I've actually talked to several people that have Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and they kind of say, it's kind of like if you're not really into boats and you buy a boat, they're like, do not buy a Lamborghini or a Ferrari because you're going to spend $300,000. These things have to be tuned after every 2,000 miles. It's like, I have 3 kids. Car seats don't fit in Lamborghinis, evidently. The thing I love about the Tesla, though, is it's like riding in a piece of software. It's definitely you feel like you're kind of in the future. And it's the opposite of a Lamborghini. You only have to have it serviced once every year, and that's just kind of to change the tires because I burned through tires on a pretty good clip. But there's no oil, so that's nice. So you only have to kind of change the tires every year, so that's nice. It's also about as fast. It's not as fast as a Ferrari Lamborghini, but it's faster than a Porsche, so boom, check. So what I'm doing now is, after a year running a public company, I realized that's fun and everything, but I'm kind of looking for my next challenge. So we have a CEO now running the day-to-day, and I'm still running the board. That's given me time to be on a couple other boards and do some investing. There's a 3D company, a 3D printing company out of Columbia that I'm working with. There's a fun company in Durham that has a solar-powered bike vehicle, and then investor in a company called WedPix. Another one that is kind of seems like a departure is this company Spiffy. And the short story here is after I sold Stingray, I was looking to diversify some of my holdings, and I had a friend that wanted to kind of just run a car wash. So I said, great, well, I'll invest in the car wash with you, and you run it, and I don't ever want to wash a car, but you just kind of do that. So we had 2 car washes, one in Cary and one in Apex. And we've always done this detailing there, and what happened during the recession of 07 and 08 is detailing just disappeared. And what we found as we talked to people is after the recession, people didn't have time anymore to just kind of have their car cleaned and detailed for 2 hours. So we got a couple of vans and we started going to them, and that solved the problem. Then at ChannelAdvisor, I was spending a lot of time traveling and I had my kind of light bulb moment the first time I used Uber. You guys all use Uber now. But it was kind of like 2010 when Uber just launched and everyone in the Bay Area was talking about it. I was like, I'll try this. And like the guy whisked up and took me somewhere. I was like, this is awesome. I pressed a button on my phone and stuff happened. That's cool. So what we did is we decided let's test this for this kind of on-demand thing for car washes. So we did this late 2013, early 2014. And it's become quite popular. And in the early days, it's very much a car wash kind of problem, so my partner took care of it, but now it's become a software problem. We have 15 vans, we're in Charlotte and Raleigh, and it's kind of like the traveling salesman problem. You guys are familiar with that, kind of to the root of 15 right now, because there'll be a van somewhere, and we're expecting them to go somewhere else at 3, 5 people walk up, we want all that revenue, what do we do, how do we kind of juggle these things to work, and the app has a lot of complexity that goes along with it. The technician has an app now. There's all this kind of orchestration that goes on. So spending a fair amount of time on scaling this up. So if anyone needs a car wash, let me know. So one of the conclusions is that I come out with this is I'm this dude from Aiken that liked computers. I went to South Carolina. I don't have an Ivy League education. I went to NC State, great school, but let's face it, we're not Stanford, we're not Harvard, and all that kind of stuff. If I can do this, you guys can do it. So the other thing is I do think, I kind of envy you guys, the students in the room, because we're at this kind of golden age of computer science and entrepreneurship. I was fortunate to kind of go through this whole X Windows, desktop computing, server, client server, and then web piece, and then a little bit of kind of mobile. You guys are kind of catching mobile and then all the cool stuff that's coming. So what's happening is the adoption rate of all these technologies is really accelerating. And this is a busy chart. The green is life expectancy. So on top of it, you guys are going to live longer than me, which totally isn't fair, but there you go. But anyway, ignore that part. So if you look at things like, let's see, color TV. Color TV, this is after black and white TV. You would think that'd be an obvious upgrade cycle. It took like 15, 20 years to kind of make it to 100%. Look at like dishwashers. You think everyone that took like 60 years for nearly everyone to have a dishwasher. But then as you get to the right, look at the slope of those lines, and this is a log scale. Smartphones literally took kind of 8 years, tablets. Then you look at Uber. Uber went from nothing to there are now more Uber drivers than taxi drivers in less than 4 years. Facebook went from 0 to billions in 6 years. So because we have these platforms and that are out there, the adoption rate is really accelerating, which is great for you guys. This is what we call job security for computer science folks. This is another view of that. The other thing that's really interesting, and this blew my mind, I went to this e-commerce conference and Ray Kurzweil spoke and he talked about the singularity. Have you guys all heard about this? His whole thesis is that if you follow Moore's law, eventually, I'll show you this chart. Here's kind of where we are. And then by 2015, compute power on Moore's law will have the brain of a rat, and then human brain happens at 2025. And then 2045, the technology should be there that you can upload your brain to the cloud, kind of a thing, which is kind of strange and whatnot. But what's amazing about this is what's driving this pace of change. And another thing that they talk about that's kind of interesting is when you're in the middle of exponential growth, it doesn't really feel like it. It's hard to kind of tell. It's still kind of like watching the grass grow. But then when you step back and say, look, Uber, wow, I don't rent cars anymore, and I used to rent cars all the time, and that happened in about a year's time frame. So these are some really interesting trends that you guys can tune into, and I think you're going to be at this golden age for the next 30 years of your careers where you can ride these waves, and there's a lot of really cool stuff that this impacts. It impacts everything. It impacts biotech, medicine, energy, everything. And you see a lot of stuff we do here at NC State is on the cutting edge of this, which is awesome. I'm still a huge fan of Mark Andreessen, and he's a venture capitalist now, and he's out there talking about software will eat the world. This really illuminated for me. So I got my Tesla in late 2013, and then early 2014, it connects to the Wi-Fi and stuff, and it said, hey, we have a new version of the software. Do you want to upgrade? And I said, yes. And it said, we added 8 features to your car. So since I've had my car for like 2 years, like literally 50 features have been added because my car is software. And so imagine when everything becomes software, even your leg or whatever it is, the healthcare system, it's going to get on to Moore's law, and then it's going to be an amazing time. A couple of the areas that I'm fascinated with: augmented reality and virtual reality. This has been really interesting to watch. That's the Microsoft Hololens. Have you guys seen some of the demos of this thing? It's pretty mind-blowing. This is my favorite because all these people, Microsoft bought Minecraft, and I have an 8-year-old daughter, and she spends like every waking moment she can inside of Minecraft. It's like this Lego thing where you build 2D worlds. And Microsoft bought Minecraft that literally had $10 million in revenue, I think, for $2.5 billion. Then the founder basically went insane, but that's another story. And then everyone's wondering, why the heck did they do that? And then in January of this year, they came out with this demo of HoloLens that kind of blew everyone's mind.
On the table over here.
So he looks at Minecraft on the wall, and then he kind of 3Ds it onto a table.
I see Lydia way up there.
As I run around the place, Dax can easily navigate and manipulate the world using his voice and his hands. He can walk around the hologram, turn around for different viewpoints, and even look inside.
Let's follow Lydia.
So, that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. And you guys are going to be able to write, think of how many different companies that's going to spawn. It's going to be amazing to see what that's like. There are already companies working on touring content for Oculus Rift and games and movies and all kinds of stuff. The other thing that's happening is the cost to create these things is coming way down. This is a Google project where they take 16 GoPros and they put it on this, and they have software to synchronize the GoPros and then stitch together the 360-degree scenes. Before this, a 360-degree camera would be $100,000, maybe a cheap one $30,000. This brings it down to $8,000. So, once you're on Moore's law, these things will be into the hundreds of dollars in the next couple of years. That's what it looks like. Another area I love is drones. This is near and dear to our heart at ChannelAdvisor because on the day before Cyber Monday in 2013, Amazon unveiled the drone. And what's funny is when I talk to these old school retailers, they think it's a hoax. They're like, this will never work. And I've talked to executives at FedEx and UPS that think it's just a PR stunt. When I talk to people at Amazon, they're like, oh, we're on version 10 and we've gotten 2 kilograms and we see a path to 4 kilograms. This thing's on Moore's law. The biggest problem they all have is battery technology. Because these quads, this is not more than a quad, let me see. Yeah, because these guys go up and down, it uses a ton of power times the number of blades. So that's the biggest thing they find is just the other technologies there, the mapping, all the other stuff going around the bad areas. They have parachutes in them. Everyone always says, what if it falls on your head? That's not going to happen. So this is another area that I think is really interesting. This is kind of version 1, and I think that's version 6. I like the internet has a lot of fun with drones. So here's delivering beer to you. Dude. Babies. What if a dog catches my Amazon delivery? What if you weaponize this Amazon strike? Here's your package. And then even better, what happens to Rudolph in the drone world? Google's is pretty interesting. It's called Project Wing, and it's a bit like a Osprey or a Harrier in that it has kind of the best of both worlds to preserve battery power. It has a fixed wing for going horizontally and then 4 props for going up and down, so it uses less battery. The other area I think that's really interesting is 3D printing, and you guys are all familiar with 3D printing, but you probably haven't seen this. These are some guys that are huge Terminator 2 fans, and they kind of said, hey, why can't we just grow stuff out of liquid? And this is 100 times faster than normal 3D printing. You essentially grow using some chemistry. They shine light through here that causes this material to harden. So I think this is pretty cool. It's called Carbon 3D. This is another company that just has got a valuation north of $1 billion. This one does plastic, but they think they can do metal and wood, all kinds of cool stuff with these kind of liquefied materials. So there it is, growing a cool thingy, something hedron. So I'm excited for you guys, a little envious. You're at the kind of, I think being in entrepreneurship is a no-brainer. You guys are at the beginning of all these exciting new technologies. The 3 that I like the most are 3D printing, drone, and augmented reality, virtual reality. Keeping an eye on that. And hopefully you guys all start awesome businesses in those areas. With that, I'll open it up to questions. If you could raise your hand for a mic for the recording, that would be good. Any questions? Quiet crowd. Marshall has a question.
All right, when you did Auction Rover, Lance and I were in New York, and you were at the Jarvis Center, I think is where, and you had Guerilla marketed 10 million stickers, if I remember correctly. Like, Jarvis Center was ground zero, and then you had done stickers, like bumper stickers, out in a radius of about a mile, maybe?
Yep.
What was the thought, and did it work?
Yeah, so we became known for our guerrilla marketing, and this all happened because we did some business cards, and they said, business cards are this kind of mathematically complicated thing where if you go order business cards, you can't just order 50, you have to order like 1,000 or it's crazy. And then we said, what if we ordered like 10,000? The cost per card went way down. And they said you could do that, and what you do is you just do the shell of the card, and then you do everyone's name on it, kind of, you can come back later. So we did like 10,000 of these things, but then they did the wrong color, and it was like this ugly orange. So we made them reprint them, and we just put on there our web address on the front and back. And we would just go around and throw them everywhere we could to kind of get our name out. And then our traffic went up. So we actually started to see, we'd go through busy airports and things, and people would kind of come and they would apply for jobs and stuff, so we could tell it was working. And then we started to go get more and more brazen. The most brazen thing we did is we got this is probably a mistake in retrospect, we got a mascot uniform of the roving dog. And then we had all these interns, and we would kind of dare them to do more and more crazy stuff. The first crazy thing we did is Emerald Lagasse was here doing a live remote from, he was out at like the Museum of Modern Art, and he was out in that amphitheater. So we all were in the crowd, and they did live from Raleigh, and it was on the Today Show, and then they showed the audience, and we all unfurled our banners of Auction Rover, and the mascot kind of ran in front of the camera, and then we got kicked out. But it was cool because Emerald Lagasse later signed to one of my Auction Rover dog bowls that we had. That was the first thing. The one that got us in the most trouble was there was a WWF match at it was RBC, it's PNC now, and we had our guy come, we dared the intern to go, and he had like 4 beers, he's like, I'm doing this, he puts on the thing, and we had tickets, and we went to this thing, and he sat with us, literally for the way wrestling works is like the first 2 hours are really crappy, like most wrestling's fake, right, but the first 3 hours are really, really bad, and then you have the main event, and that's what gets televised. So we sat there literally for 2 hours in the dog suit, and no one asked us what we were doing. And it went live from Raleigh, WWF is war, and the guy, he jumped up on the stage, and the ref like threw him off, and they kicked us out. And we almost got arrested for that one. That was like tricky. But then we went to this trade show, and it was called it's called the Internet Show. I think it was just called the Internet. You know, it was like really kind of silly. It'd be like electricity today. So we put our cards out everywhere, like you said, and then I walk in. I was meeting with a venture capitalist, and I walk in and I hear this Rover, and I'm like, what is going on? The guy had put on the mascot, and he was climbing one of those rock climbing walls. You know, it's like 300 feet in the sky. He was in the mascot uniform climbing. He got up there and he kind of got stuck. He couldn't really get down, so they had to send up 2 climbers to get him down. So all of our guerrilla marketing got a fair amount of press and attention, so that was a lot of fun. It's the best stories to tell of nearly getting arrested. So, yes. We got a lot of fines. We violated every sign ordinance known to man and got all these fines for that too. It was inexpensive marketing.
Since you did both VC funded and bootstrap funded companies, which did you ultimately prefer?
It's really kind of a question of what you're building. So at Stingray, we were able to kind of, you know, the way we built it, we were able to do it pretty profitably and not feel like we were losing out. You guys, again, are very fortunate. When we built ChannelAdvisor, I could probably build ChannelAdvisor and raise $10 million now. So a lot of that money went to servers and, you know, server farms and hosting and all this kind of stuff. Today, you know, I definitely spin up a cloud, you know, service and that kind of thing. A lot of startups are raising a lot less cash because of that. So I would definitely say, you know, if it's your first business or something like that, you can, you know, the best money you will ever get is from customers that pay for your software. And if you can get something people will pay for, you can bootstrap your way through. One of the things that's unique about the RTP area, I think, is a lot of our companies are bootstrapped. And that makes them much more resilient and less susceptible to these kind of crazy trends that whipsaw a lot of the Bay Area companies around. For every Uber and Facebook, there's like 1,000 other companies that fail you never hear of. And it's kind of a, you know, they raise $5 million, they pivot, and then crash. And, you know, they spend up a lot of their time and effort just kind of looking for that next big thing. Good example is there's a company here, Bronto, that software as a service email kind of marketing platform. They built it kind of slowly over kind of the same time frame we did, and they sold for over $200 million, bootstrapped it to NetSuite. So, you know, they were able to kind of just slow and steady wins the race and not worry about having a competitor to kind of come in and take everything. At ChannelAdvisor, we had some competitors and felt like we were going after kind of a bigger space and kind of had to raise capital to get out there and get the servers and everything. So a lot of it depends on the circumstances, who your competitors are, and what it's going to take to build your product. But for most software today, you know, it's actually pretty doable with sweat equity and some cloud services, which is pretty awesome. So the bar has come way, way down. This hurts the VC industry because, you know, venture capitalists are raising all these big rounds and they need to put more and more capital to work, and software startups need less capital. And when you think about it, it's kind of interesting. A lot of the capital is going towards hardware companies or something like an Uber, where they're just kind of massively throwing scale against these kinds of things. And then there's a lot that's dried up at the smaller companies. So again, that helps us in the RTP area, I think, a lot, because our companies are kind of more grinded out kind of companies. Question? Mike? Yep. Question?
So what about cautionary tales? What would you have done differently if you could go back and redo it all again?
Yeah. It's easy to kind of, another trap I find a lot of entrepreneurs get into is I'm a product software guy, so, you know, it would be nice to go change a lot of software stuff. You know, we went down some wrong ends and things. But I try not to beat myself up too much about that, because when you're creating a new category, you don't know what the right path is. So you have to kind of go wander down some of those dead ends and come back and go back. A corollary to that I get asked a lot of times is, okay, you've had 3 companies and 3 successes, and one of the reasons why is I've never bet the company on something that was one of these kind of ended up being a dead end. So even though I've explored some wacky stuff here and there and done some acquisitions that some worked and some didn't, I never have gotten to the point where I've had to risk the company for that. So to be honest, I don't have any kind of, when I really reflect on it, I don't have any huge regrets about it. So. It's not as dramatic. I shouldn't have killed that guy. No, just kidding.
What primary roles exist for non-technologists in these startups, and at what point do they become most important?
Yeah, so good question. So there's, so if you look at somewhere around 10 people, you're going to hire, so let's say you're going to build this awesome software product. You're going to hire your engineering kind of folks first, your coders. At some point, you're going to need QA folks, and then another point, you're going to have to start layering in a very important function we found is product management, and that's where engineers are smart. You can definitely send them out to customers, but engineers are your most expensive kind of resource, and that's really inefficient to have engineers going and visiting all your customers. So you introduce this middle function called a product manager, and that's a really good kind of one of the first things I've always hired when building a good product. And they're kind of the CEO of the product. Their job is to understand from whatever constituents you have, be it customers or new customers, sales, internal customers, that kind of thing. What do you need the software to do? And then also to kind of isolate the folks writing the software so they can be as efficient as possible. So that's one example. And then after you have a product, then you layer on tons of non-technical people. So you're going to need salespeople, marketing people, legal, HR, all those kinds of things as you scale up. So there's definitely, now a lot of the Bay Area companies, they always kind of say, well, everyone should have a computer science background. So like Google, everyone has a computer science background. So like HR, you have to have a computer science background, and legal, you have to have a comp sci. And like PM, you have to do that. And I think the danger of that is you end up with this groupthink where everything becomes an algorithm, right? So HR becomes an algorithm, and there's kind of like this machine that's hiring people, and you assume that that's going well, but you don't, how can that measure empathy and the ability to interact with others and that kind of thing? So I think a lot of that's misguided, and the pendulum will swing back around towards having a good mix of technical people and diverse, all kinds of backgrounds, kind of helping make a great company. Any other questions?
Hi. So you mentioned company culture a few times, and you've been recognized for it through ChannelAdvisor. What sort of practical things did you implement in your companies, whether it be ChannelAdvisor or your previous companies, that really made the workplace something that everybody enjoyed and encouraged everyone to work hard?
Yeah, good question. So if you couldn't hear, the question was, what are some of the things you've done to have a good culture? And the tricky thing is I've always tried, every 3 years or so, I'll try to put like the culture in writing, and then I've realized that I hate that process and I stink at it. So, and it ends up being cheesy. Like it's hard for me to avoid the NCR badge problem when I'm doing that. My favorite one is when people come up with like silly little acronyms like SPAPOW, and you're like, wow, that's really silly, or cheers or something like that. So I would kind of describe the culture as an unculture, and this drives HR people crazy. I've probably been to like 50 HR people because of this. But like the first time, a new director of HR will come in and say like, we don't have a culture document? I'm going to create one. And they come, and it's like this really cheesy thing that you would like, you would totally laugh at, and it's ridiculous. And I say, yeah, we're not going to do that. And then they get mad and quit. So, oh well. So that's now part of the interview process with HR people is, you're going to come and you're going to try to do this, and I'm going to say no, and you're going to quit. Are you okay with that? And so that actually filters out a lot of that mess. So that part of it is just kind of having an unculture, because the other thing is when you talk to people and you really listen to them, what makes the people that work well at our company, what motivates them is working with other smart people. And the thing that demotivates them is when they work with someone that isn't pulling their load, a bad teammate. You guys have seen it in your team project. This is the big thing you learn from a team project, right? My kids are in high school, and it happens all the time. Well, there's 4 of us, and 2 aren't doing anything, and 2 of us are doing everything, and that's just the nature of kind of a randomized group. So what we realized is that's the number one thing we can do for the culture is really measure everyone's performance as best you can, and do peer reviews and those kinds of things, and then you owe it to the people that are really contributing a lot to get rid of the people that aren't contributing. And it sounds callous when you say it like that, but it's actually better for both folks. Usually the people that aren't doing well, they realize it, and they're not happy either. So you're almost kind of, I used to agonize over this, but what I found is you're actually giving them, many times these conversations You build them up, oh, I've got to let this guy go, it's going to be painful. Then he'll be like, whew, I'm glad you said that. I totally feel I'm not a great fit. That happens more often than the other one. So that's probably the number one thing I'd say that I've learned over kind of a 15-year cycle is to really, you kind of have to really do that and do it well. It's really hard too. Sales reps, it's easy. They have a quota, the number, you can kind of stack it up and say, all right, these guys are obviously doing nothing. With engineering, it's hard because all these companies have tried this, right? Microsoft kind of famously, or IBM famously had this measure of KLOCs, which was thousands of lines of code that they would measure their engineers on, which is kind of hilarious. But they literally, for like 30 years, IBM had that as their standard. How many lines of code could you generate? IBM or Microsoft does this like harsh forced ranking, and everyone gets a 3 except these super stellar people, and those are tough because you can't really. It tends up being a lot subjective. So that's the hardest one, is figuring that out. And we do a lot of things like the project and how it went and how everyone works with their team and that kind of thing. But that's the number one thing I would say is kind of, I found it very hard to document culture, and then we just kind of do a lot of it by showing folks, here's how we operate and how to treat people. The other thing you find, and you guys have seen this too, right? There's this curve that the kind of the wacky smart people are on this exponential curve, and when they're out here, they tend not to work well in teams. So just to pick on like Google, I go out there all the time and you meet these super smart people, but they're totally neurotic and crazy, right? And they don't work well in teams. And at Google, they've decided that's okay. But in our company, that wouldn't really work out very well. If you ever get a chance, watch the sitcom Silicon Valley. I can tell you that it's like 99% of that stuff's true when you go out to the Bay Area. It's kind of funny. You meet all those kind of stereotypes are out there and hilarious and fun to deal with. Any other questions? There's one over here. Maybe time for one more. One more. Time for one more. I'm getting the hook.
If you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently?
If I could kind of Marty McFly and go do it, I would go through everything faster, I think, because I would have the benefit of hindsight. There's really not a lot I would do differently, to be honest with you. I think I've had a great career. I've kind of really exceeded my own expectations. I thought it would be cool to do an IPO when I was 18, and I did it. I'm kind of like shocked that I was able to do that. So, so I've got no complaints here. So I'm, I wouldn't change anything, to be honest with you. It's been a good run. Thanks. All right. Thanks, everybody.